Well, hello, gorgeous souls. Welcome to Calm AF. Again, today's episode is a little bit different, as you probably already know from the title. I didn't think that we would be here having lessons from the hospital part 2, but listen, I guess we weren't done yet. So if you didn't listen to the first part, it was that my daughter, Emily, has been having some kind of mystery health issues for a long time, actually. But for the last, 5-6 months, they have gotten severe enough where it was necessary for her to be hospitalized. The last time was end of January, beginning of February. And it was 11 days of just kind of trying to figure out what was going on, trying to get her better. And we came home, had a little reprieve, a little bit of a relief from the symptoms. And then about, a week or two ago, I don't even know time anymore, the symptoms came back pretty severely, and she is back in the hospital again. So, if you hear a lot of noise behind me, I am down in the lobby. This is the quietest place I could actually find. I'm in a children's hospital. So this is literally the quiet place I could find. I tried to do it outside, and it just, as soon as I started talking, it got windy. So this is there's someone going to be walking past me or driving past me, vacuuming in just a second, you will hear. But we're going to power through, because that is what you do when you're in a situation like this. You just make the best of it. You do it the best you can. So, the reason also why I'm doing it down in the lobby is because Emily's grandparents are in from out of town. This was a pre-planned trip for them to be in from Illinois, because unfortunately, just to make things a little more interesting and a little sweeter, Emily was supposed to be graduating from high school. Today, the day that this episode drops, is the day she is meant to be graduating from high school, and instead she's going to be in the hospital, and it's such a bummer. I had posted something on Instagram, and a bunch of people had said, like, hey, can we send her, congratulations? Can we, send her a gift card? And I was like, absolutely. I don't know the best way to get that information. I'll put my email in the show notes. I don't know. Instead of me trying to answer, lots of people asking for, how to send her something, I'll just put it in the show notes. That'll be the easiest thing. But, so her grandparents are upstairs with her right now, and they are having a little visit. So I decided I would try and slip away to somewhere quiet and share with you the lessons from this round in the hospital. Because if you don't know me, I can't do anything without finding lessons in something. I can't go for a walk without having aha moments and epiphanies. It's just the way my brain works. And I feel like, especially when you're going through something hard, if I'm going to have to go through something hard, and this isn't even me having to go through something hard, right? This is Emily having to go through something hard, and me having to be the mom of someone going through something hard. But I think anytime something like this, where you're going through something difficult, a challenge, at the very least, I want to come out at the other side with some new lessons, I want to grow through it. I don't want to get to the other side a shred of who I used to be, because that's already part of going through hard things, right? Is it's just takes so much out of you. So at the very least, I'm going to make sure that I am finding any little nugget that I can that's going to help me. It's going to build my resilience for not just, hopefully there isn't a part 3, but if there is a part 3, or, if there's something else, not if, when there is some other challenge that comes up in my life, I just want to keep adding to my resilience arsenal. So I just wrote down 3 kind of quick little lessons so far. We are on day like 5, I think, of lessons from this round in the hospital. So the first thing I wrote down is hardly anything is an emergency. So Emily, along with mystery illness, one of the things I'm so proud that I was able to pass along to her is the worst veins in the world. Like, you can't find them. Once you do find them, you can't get anything from them. They roll away, they disappear, like truly disappear. When we got to the ER, it took 5 nurses using an ultrasound machine nearly an hour to get her vein, to get an IV. And I mean, it was a whole thing. So anyway, they got the IV in her in the ER. We were up in the room. This was like maybe a day later. And she was like, Mom, my IV is kind of stinging. And I was like, oh, okay. That happens sometimes. That's something I learned the last time, is that sometimes they sting. And so we did some of the tricks that had worked last time, just kind of readjusting or elevating it, putting a towel under it. And so, see if that helps. Otherwise, we'll call the nurse. And then a few minutes later, she's like, hey, Mom, does this look swollen? And I look over, and like her forearm looks like it's a water balloon filling up. I was like, oh, yeah, that doesn't seem right. And this is the first time I've ever seen this. I don't know what's going on. So what we eventually learned is that her vein blew, and the fluid from the IV, instead of going into the vein, was going into like the tissue around the veins. So again, though, the first time, I don't know, I assume, it's probably not the worst thing in the world, but probably a big deal, sort of. So my first time this is happening, I'm like, seems like we don't want that to happen, right? I don't think her arm is supposed to be blowing up like a water balloon. So I press the call button, and, that goes to like a general nurse on the floor. And she's like, yes, how can I help you? 26, 26, 26. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, oh, we're just having a problem with her IV, if the nurse can come and check it. Okay, I'll tell your nurse right away. 26, 26, 26. So I'm like, okay, clearly there's something going on outside. And, it's in a hospital. There's buttons and alarms and bells and things ringing all the time. I had noticed, a couple doors down from us, it sounded like a more aggressive sounding alarm. And, one that I didn't hear often, but I don't know what the alarms are. And so after the nurse was like 26, 26, all of a sudden I hear people just running past our room, like one person, 2 people. And I hear down the hall, the voices are getting a little bit louder. The ringing of the alarm sounded more alarming. And then, maybe 15 minutes later, it stopped. And, I just see everybody start walking past. And about 15 minutes later, our nurse comes in, and she's like, I'm so sorry. That took so long. We had an emergency down the hall. And I was like, no, of course, this isn't an emergency, but I think there's something wrong with her IV. She's like, oh, yeah, let me get that. And, was like, yes, this is important. Yes, Emily's vein blowing was important. And it was scary for us, right? Because the uncertainty, I don't know what this is. I don't know where the fluid is going. But it's not an emergency compared to the actual real life emergency that was happening 2 doors down. And maybe this is even a lesson from last time. I don't remember what my first lessons were, but just that realization, like, okay, yes, this is important, but it's not an emergency. There is a very big difference between things being hard or things being bad or things going wrong and true emergencies. But our nervous systems are constantly reading everything as emergencies, right? You have a conflict with your partner or your kid or your friends, or a conflict at work, or something happens, and your nervous system like completely jumps from, everything is fine to this is a real emergency, like push the call button, alert all of the nurses, make them, but almost nothing is an emergency. I was sitting there thinking about that as I'm hearing, all of these people in the hospital, all of these buttons and alarms and things going off. Majority of the time, there aren't emergencies going on, even in this setting. But sometimes there are. But most of the time, it's not. Okay, so hardly anything is an emergency. The second thing that I wrote down, lesson, have perspective, but don't diminish. So the second lesson is along the same lines as the first one, but a little bit different. And that is having perspective versus like gaslighting yourself. Okay, so Emily's vein blowing was not an emergency. The baby down the hall was an emergency. The baby down the hall that was having an emergency, that was an emergency. But again, that doesn't mean that Emily's vein blowing wasn't a problem. It doesn't mean that it's not important. As I am walking down the hall in this hospital, we're in a children's hospital, and I'm walking past babies and toddlers and little kids that are basically living here, hooked up to a million machines that are keeping their bodies working the way they're supposed to be working. And I started thinking, like, it's crazy to me how, like, Emily's illness is important. It's so important. But in this hospital, she is probably one of the, like, least sick kids here. Puts things in perspective, right? But that awareness doesn't mean that what Emily's going through isn't a big deal or isn't important, or that we should be grateful it isn't worse. Like, yes, we can be grateful that it isn't worse, but that doesn't mean that what she's going through isn't hard. I actually call this the dark side of gratitude, and it's something I see so many people, probably most of you listening, do. It could be worse. It could be worse. I should just be grateful because everything could be worse. I should just be grateful for what I have. Yes, of course, 99% of the time, whatever you're going through could always be worse, right? There's always something worse. Like, there's two people in a hospital having emergencies, and one of them is worse than the other. But that doesn't mean it's not important. What you are going through isn't important just because it could be worse. Just because your marriage or your job or your life could be worse doesn't mean you should just suck it up and be grateful. Yes, acknowledge things could be worse. Yes, be grateful. Absolutely. Find the gratitude, find the appreciation for what you do have. But it's also totally okay to want more and to validate yourself that what you're going through is hard. I hope everyone, no matter what their circumstances is how great or okay or not great or terrible it is able to say, I am grateful for what I do have and I want better. Listen to me. It's okay to want better. There is no need to feel guilt for wanting something better just because someone else has it worse. Your guilt is not changing things for you or the person who has it worse. I want you to imagine for a second if, my daughter Emily is going through what she's going through, and I'm like, well, Emily could be worse, so I guess we should just be grateful and just be fine with how she is now. Just suck it up, because other kids are sicker than her, so she should just suck it up and be grateful that she's not as sick as they are. She shouldn't want more. She shouldn't want to get better, because what about those kids? Does that help the kids who are sicker than her? No. Does her staying sick somehow make them less sick? No, that's not how it works. And I know this example sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But I know so many of you are doing this to yourself currently, right now. I should just be happy with what I've got. I should just suck it up because it could be worse. No, you can be grateful without diminishing what you have. You can be grateful and go ahead and let yourself want more. All right, the third one. Intention is better than reaction. So, our first long-term visit to the hospital a few months ago was fortunately one of our very first experiences with staying long-term in a hospital, aside from when I gave birth. And because this was the first time that Emily had ever been dealing with these symptoms and we didn't know what we were dealing with, it was just test after test after test, and nothing they tried was helping. None, all the tests were coming back normal, and all of the tests or all of the things that they were trying weren't helping. So I spent probably the first few days in like pure reaction mode. Like Emily would have a symptom and I would immediately go into that emergency, right? Like this is an emergency. And that fight or flight would kick in. We would talk about test results or treatment plans. And I was listening, but also not listening. And that's the thing about being in a dysregulated state, is that you cannot be fully present. Unless, here's the caveat, unless you are actually in pure reaction mode, like in pure fight mode, in pure flight mode, in an actual emergency, right? Then you are absolutely present. You're not thinking, you're just reacting. But most of the time we're in this like messy middle, this like lazy fight flight. Like I'm not actually going to fight. I'm not actually going to run, but I am going to get really close to doing it in my head and feel like I'm just about to, but not quite going to. So I spent my first few days of our first hospital visit in that lazy reactionary space, kind of like everything feels emergency, but I'm not actually acting on it. And then during our stay, Dr. Douchebag barged into our room, barged into our life, literally barged into our room. It was very early in the morning. Like we were still sleeping early. I think it was even before the nurses did their shift change, so that would probably be before 7 a.m. And this Dr. D, he came barging in the room. Emily, I'm Dr. Douchebag. What's the problem? What's going on? Tell me what's going on. Like Emily was sound asleep. So Emily and I are like trying to wake up, trying to remember like where we even are and what's happening. And he proceeds to basically start scolding Emily for her symptoms, or basically like challenging everything that she's going through. It was clear from the first minute that he was annoyed that this is what he decided, that this was just an anxious teenage girl. There wasn't anything really wrong. And she just needed to be like shamed into getting better. She just needed to be shamed into like feeling better, or relieving her symptoms. I don't know what he thought. Basically the message of his visit to our room was like, too bad, suck it up. And he barged into our room and he just barged out of our room. And after he left, honestly, Emily and I were like, what just happened? Like, what did we even just talk about? And then our nurse came in and she was like, oh, wow. So big changes. I guess you talked to the doctor and you're making some big changes. And basically she was like, you decided to stop the treatment. The only thing that was working, that was like pushing her in the right direction. And I was like, nope, that is not what we discussed that I can think of. That's not what we decided on. I mean, again, I was in that dysregulated state, so everything was happening so fast, but I know for sure I did not agree to this. He was super condescending, and actually I would call him cruel. And, so I asked the nurse, I was like, how does this work? How do I make sure that this Dr. Douchebag never enters our room again? Like he cannot, like, I want him off of her case. I want someone else. And she was like, yes, you can get rid of him. Just in case you ever find yourself in a situation, you can fire your doctor. So while we all agree that Dr. Douchebag should not be allowed to work with humans in any capacity, he did give me a lesson. He did do something that I thank him for. And that is, he knocked me right out of that reactionary mode that I had been in the first few days of our hospital stay. When Dr. D-Bag came in, clearly trying to be the big, important, dominant person in the room. Just so cute. I was not at all the most powerful person. I was not in my most powerful energy in that room. He was the predator, and he crept in with his like sneak attack, right? Coming in when he knew we'd be sleeping, coming in hot. So like before we can know what's going on, before we have a chance to like pause and take a breath and think, he is already attacking. And so we are already in defensive mode. He knew that's what he was doing. And once we kind of got to the other side of that, I was like, nope, done, and done. Like, that will not be happening again. What I decided in that moment, and what has stayed with me and what has been with me the whole time we've been at this hospital is that my job is to be the strongest energy in the room, which means not the strong, like aggressive. That's not the strongest energy. Aggressive energy is the scaredest energy in the room. Okay. So again, think of this the next time you're like encountering someone who's like being real aggressive with you. Like he is the smaller, or she, they are the smaller energy, the scared energy in the room. Your only job is to be the calm one, right? Because we all know that an aggressive person, that they're just trying to prove dominance through fear. So it's coming straight from insecurity. So no, I needed to be the most powerful energy in the room by being the most regulated, calm AF energy in the room. If someone comes in hot, I stay cool. If someone comes in and tries to dominate out of fear, I stay calm as fuck. And it wasn't just to deal with people we might encounter in the hospital who are trying to be like big, scary people. The truth is 70% of the doctors that we encountered were kind, and they weren't trying to like dominate. 70%. 70. That means 30% weren't, but 70% were. And 100% of the nurses were freaking amazing. There were no nurse douchebags we encountered, but the reason why you want to stay calm AF, that I decided I'm going to do this, wasn't just to deal with the 30% of D-bag doctors. It was because when I stay regulated, I'm able to access my higher level thinking. I'm able to disagree with, I'm able to question a doctor or a nurse without being in that frantic or anxious energy space. So I'm able to just, in that moment, a switch flipped. And the most important thing for me was to make sure I was in control of me, that I was intentional instead of reactionary. So when it started looking like, last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, that Emily was heading back into the hospital, I kept remembering this, like intentional, not reactional. Intentional, not reactional. So, what does that mean? It means that I am, making sure that I am taking care of myself while we are here in the way that I need to, so that intentional is accessible, right? So what that even means, it's simple, silly things, right? Like getting up, getting dressed, putting myself together. Obviously, I'm not going to get up at the crack of dawn in case there is a Dr. D-bag that barges in at 6:30, but I know that I have to just pause no matter what they're doing. If someone is attacking from fear, no matter what, no matter how it feels, I am going to take the 10 seconds to bring myself back into an intentional, regulated state before dealing with that person or that situation, whatever it may be. So that was my third kind of big lesson so far. Maybe there'll be 3 more that I'll share with you next time. But that's really what I wanted to share today. I hope that this background wasn't too distracting, and you could hear the lessons. I hope they're helpful for you, because they're not just, again, these aren't just lessons I only use while I'm in the hospital. These are life lessons. These are absolutely applicable to everyone in any sort of a challenging or difficult situation. So the 3 lessons: not everything is an emergency. Have perspective, but don't diminish what you are going through. And intention is always going to serve you more and be more helpful than reaction, unless you're in an actual emergency, which we know is hardly ever the case. All right, gorgeous souls. Send up your prayers, your vibes, your energy, your healing wishes, whatever you got. Send them to Emily. Send her some, love as she graduates from high school, from her hospital room. And I hope that you are having an amazing day, an amazing rest of your week. And I will see you next time.